Okay, are we ready to go here? Volume levels looking good. People logging on. Okay. And let's one more second here. Okay, welcome everybody back to our photography class. My name is Michael Markowsky, and I'm going to be showing you a little bit about how to use your camera. Welcome to my studio. I've been doing a lot of work, none of which you can see here, but it's definitely improving my life dramatically. And this will probably be the last day that we'll be using these iPhones that are hooked up here. So you're probably, right now you're looking at this screen directly in front of me with this atrociously blown out white of my shirt, right? So this is a great example of overexposed. Now, iPhones work fantastic, but in this instance, it's quite limited, right? Like and you can also see there's a little bit of noise. That's the ISO being quite high. So the iPhone is confused right now, and it doesn't know what to do. There's kind of a dark background behind me. I got a light shirt, high contrast situation, difficult thing for a camera to do. What makes me super excited about the next class is when I have my mirrorless cameras running all of this, I'll be able to fine-tune all those things. So this is, again, another reminder of the limitations of your auto functions on your camera versus the manual functions on your camera. And so today, what I want to do is I want to really explore shutter speed, and I want you to get a foundational understanding of what shutter speed can do. And then we're going to practice using our camera shutter speed to take some photographs. And I think by the end of the hour here, if you're following along with me with your camera, the wheels in your head are going to start spinning like crazy, and you're going to have lots of ideas. And you'll really realize the power of your camera to do things that far, far, far exceed the power of your smartphone. And when you're walking around, let's say you're on vacation somewhere and you're going through, you've just had dinner and you're walking down a nice cobblestone street somewhere in Europe, and you think like, oh, I wish I had my good camera with me. I can take a kind of good photo with my iPhone, but I wish I had something that could really capture this moment. Okay, so speaking of which, I want to do just a really quick recap, because I know it's been about 5 days or since we last saw one another. So I want to just, there might be a few people that don't have quite the same amount of time to spend doing this, and it might be a good review for everybody here. So I'm just switching. Here's my DSLR, the one I'm holding in my hand here, right? So you can see it's a little bit jerky here. I'm not sure exactly why. That's odd. But so let's practice using the manual modes as well as the exposure meter on our camera. Now I'm going to set this down because I see it just moving all over the place, and that's going to make somebody sick, right? Okay, so just right here, I'm going to tap my shutter release, which is the button that takes the pictures, right? And that will do an exposure reading, right? So, and you can see in the left side of the screen there's basically right below me right now, there's that vertical line that's going up and down, and you see it says minus 2.5 or something right around there, right? So it's saying it's a little bit too dark. Now, if I look at the picture, I don't know if I think it's too it's really that dark or not, but I'm just gonna move it here. See how I'm now pointing, because right now I have single point exposure metering, and that's something you can look in your dial versus kind of all over exposure metering, or kind of center weighted, or single point. And just like we talked about with focus, how we can have focus on one point, or kind of a center weighted, or all over when you use the autofocus, we can do the same thing with metering. And so you see where that little square in the center of the picture is pointed. So the camera right now is saying, whoa, look how dark you're getting. Right now we gotta turn all the dials up in order to get more light in there. But then look here, I'm just going to, I know this is out of focus, but if I point here at this cone, look at this, the camera's like, whoa, it's way too bright. You gotta brighten things up big time, buddy, or it's gonna be an abysmal photograph. So this just gives you an idea that can be a little bit tricky relying fully on your exposure meter. So that's why it's helpful to kind of play around with your camera to get a little bit more familiar with it. So, but for our sake, right now, you see I'm at 13 seconds shutter speed. I'm gonna speed it up, because we were really, oops, sorry, this was 1/10 of a second. Now you see we're getting down here. Here's 1/50th of a second shutter speed. Right, so it's pretty dark. And my f-stop, my aperture, is at 3.2. So I'm going to see if I can adjust it anymore. No, that's my lowest aperture. And my ISO is at 500. I'm going to brighten that up. And again, it kind of depends on what I'm looking at here. You see, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze here. Goodness gracious. I've been doing lots of moving and sanding and stuff down here. It's a little dusty. So it's a little tricky to find exactly where it is, but you know, say I like this, and now right now I'm out of focus because I'm in manual mode right now. And last week we talked about manual mode, and so I'm just, since I can stay in manual mode and I can turn the ring on the front of my camera, and you can see that those blue lines kind of appear and disappear. Right, so you see kind of appear on that little red thing, which I can talk about. And then it's kind of back into this area here. And take a picture. And let's just review that picture by pressing the play button. And this shows what we were looking at. And I'm now going to press my, I'm going to zoom into the photograph so that I can kind of zoom around in here. And things are looking okay, but you know what I'm seeing? I saw it in a few places, okay. So this right here, see this text on the screen? This is Rode is a microphone company. I'm not promoting them or anything, but so technically this should actually be in relative focus. It's not any closer or further away than anything. But you see how like the O and the E and the N, they're kind of overlapping one another. So that means that there was a little bit of camera shake going on here. I'll just see if there's some more examples. I thought I saw some this way. If we go back this direction. So it's just that halo effect. So that means that even though my camera was laying on the table like this, at 1/50th of a second, I got some weird motion blur, or camera shake, sorry, in the camera, where just that little bit of movement was causing a problem. So in order to kind of help this, I'm not sure if we talked about this last week, But we want to use the timer. I think we did talk about this. So I'm going to go into my camera setting and set a timer. Now your camera will have different settings. This one is saying I can choose between 2 seconds and 10 seconds of a countdown timer. So maybe I'll just, well, let's go back to 2 here. And now let's just try taking this photograph again. I take my hands off. Okay, now let's see if we can zoom into this picture again and see if this helped anything. Oh, I can embarrass myself here. Is this going to be a little sharper? Oh, maybe it was slightly out of focus then after all. Okay. So, I mean, that's possible. The other thing, actually, you know what it's most likely is, and I'll just go back out of here, is I was taking this photograph, and this thing over here is on the very side of the frame of the picture. And it's not uncommon for things on the very edges of your picture to be maybe a little bit out of focus, just because of the way that the light is kind of coming in and bending through all of these different lenses. So that's a little bit more than I thought. This is supposed to be a pretty good lens, so I don't think most people ever really look at the corners or edges of their photos very often, because usually what you're interested in is right in the middle of the pictures, and that's generally where the sharpest part of the image is going to be. So that's just I mean, that is interesting that that came up, but that's just kind of a good reminder that that is something that can happen. So you want to kind of, I also noticed this. Let's say if you have, and this can happen on your iPhone or any other photo device, maybe you've taken a photograph and there is somebody standing on the edge of the picture and their face looks maybe a little bit weird and long, or their body is a little bit taller than normal. Buildings can stretch out and they get a tiny little bit of that fisheye quality. So again, we're seeing it right there. It wasn't something I intended to show you, but that's where we are. Okay, so just using these different settings in our exposure meter, we can get a fairly good image. Now, I'm just going to kind of, let's go back to this main view. Wow, that is just so bright, that drives me nuts. So, what I want to show you what I want to show you are tripods, because I think tripods are really, really, really helpful for taking your photography to the next level. So let me see, I'm just going to bring this up here. So I'm going to show you a whole bunch of small little tripods, small to large tripods. So here is a very inexpensive tripod I bought from just a local discount department store, and this is actually intended for smartphones, right? So here's an old phone, right, and it kind of snaps into place. And so this is actually, I've carried this thing around with me like that and had it in my back pocket while my wife and I were in Hawaii last year. And it's great because even if I just had my smartphone with me, this would enable me to take some pretty good photographs, because you can unlock certain manual features of your smartphone. And I teach a smartphone photography class that maybe after this I'll film for people to show you how to get fairly good results out of your smartphone. So this works for your smartphone. And it can also work for, let's say, if you have a small point and shoot camera. And I have had some people, I don't have a camera that is light enough here, but I've had, when I bring this to classes, I've had some people who have, you know, small mirrorless cameras that are just a little bit bigger than this that will fit in here quite well. One thing to kind of keep in mind is that this little spring thing here is kind of flimsy. So you want to be careful that your phone or anything can slip out of it relatively easily, right? It's kind of locked in there, but I wouldn't want to be kind of holding this over a railing over the ocean or anything. In fact, well, I have another iPhone filming above here, so I can't take it down, but I did buy, which is what's holding that up, little devices that actually kind of lock in and screw so that your phone or your small camera won't fall out. Okay, so that's a quick small tripod that I thought would be interesting to show you. And it's kind of modeled after this. This is called the GorillaPod, made by Joby. I don't know if you can see any logo on here. This actually on top here is not a Joby thing. This is I've kind of added this extra little plate on top, and this is extra little device. I'm just going to kind of, as I'm talking here, show you. This I add to the, allows me to pretty much really quickly hook up any camera that I have with a particular kind of mounting plate to this tripod. And I have these kind of things. You could buy this extra little device here on the web for, let me see, probably like $10. And so I've got about 5 or 6 of them mounted all over the place so that I can really kind of quickly take my camera and kind of lock it in, and then I can take it out and then mount it somewhere else around the room here. Now, sorry, but to get back on track, what I love about these GorillaPod, or GorillaPod, is the flexibility, you know, the literal flexibility of the arms to kind of move the tripod down. And if you really have to get down to the ground, you can kind of, you know, put it down as low as it gets, right? And so I'll just put a camera back on here. So you could, and so it can lay kind of relatively close to the ground. So if you wanted to take a shot on the ground, on the beach or something, you could do that. You can also bend the arms up and then take a photo this way. A few years ago, I was doing a daily vlog, video log, and I would carry this thing around in my backpack all the time. And it was fantastic because even if you were in a situation where you didn't, where you wanted the tripod up higher, I would just look for a garbage can or a newspaper box, and I could set it on top, and it would be like a regular high-sized tripod. And then to go on even further than that is that you can bend these things around. So I've had this locked around the, you know, the arms of railings overlooking the ocean. I've had this, you know, locked onto seats on an airplane. You know, pretty much you can. So I love that type of flexibility, that it can get to places that a regular tripod cannot. Okay. What else do I want to say about the GorillaPod? Oh, another just little quick thing is when I originally bought this, I bought it with just the legs, and I think that costs like $40 or something. And then I realized really quickly that if I wanted to get this thing level, I was kind of doing all of this little finicking and fumbling, and it just would take me forever. And so I ended up buying their this ball head that they sell separately, and that costs like another $40. And if I was to do this over again, and I think I'll probably buy another one of these because over time these things get a little bit loose, is I think for like $60 they sell the whole thing together with the head, the ball head, and the tripod legs. So that's just a little quick tip of something I would do if I was to do that again. But I think this is amazing. If you don't like big, bulky tripods, this is something that weighs about the same weight as a coffee cup, right? So it's very great. It's very great for traveling. Maybe I should have even begun with this. This is a tiny little tripod. Actually, this came with a different product, but you can buy things like this in various different places. And this is a really simple tripod. And what this allows me to do is just kind of put the camera down. Now I can kind of, this mat is a little bit sticky, so I can kind of move the camera up and down a little bit if I have to, but you can see, you know, it doesn't like kind of being positioned that way. So one of the other little things that you could buy is an extra little ball head. So this is a little ball head from, I ordered online. And so I can now take this, and I'd have to get the, oh, let me see. Let's just do this. It's a little bit awkward. So actually, you know, why don't I just have this extra little plate here? I know you're sitting here thinking, when are we going to talk about shutter speed? I'll get there, but I do think, you know, tripods and shutter speed are hand in hand. They go hand in hand. Because to take photos with long exposures, and in some cases in fast exposures, you want a tripod to help steady your camera. So this now, I've just adapted this cheap tripod into, you know, so now whatever situation, if I was doing some astral photography, I'm going to talk about how to take pictures of stars next class. This will allow me to do that. So that's actually, I'm glad that I just did that, because I've been thinking about this forever and I keep forgetting to do it. So now this becomes an even lighter tripod. So, okay. So you can see that slides right off. Okay. That is exciting. Okay. So I'm going to show a few more. This is a cheap tripod I got from a place down the street here in Vancouver called London Drugs, and they're across Canada. Now, I've added this big extra, this is another big heavy ball head that I got here. I'm just going to move that out of the way. So this ball head is just like this little one we were just looking at, all right? Except it's much more kind of hardcore. This is actually quite heavy. So this is the weight easily is even a little bit heavier than the whole GorillaPod. So this is not something you probably want to be traveling with, but it definitely is a great addition to the top of any tripod. And I'm just gonna screw that back on. And so this will allow me, once I get this in again, it just gives me a little bit more fine-tuning ability that even a really nice tripod generally doesn't have, because generally tripods do not come with a ball head for good reasons too, because sometimes having a ball head can actually be a little bit of a pain, because if you want to shoot video and do any kind of panning in kind of a nice, like, fluid up or down, a ball head is not ideal for that situation. So the one thing, if I'm going to buy a tripod, I'm just going to see if I can get this into, if I was going to go buy a new tripod today, one of the first things that I would really want would be the ability to have one of these removable clips so that I can take my camera while it's attached to this. So let's say I'm just going to throw this camera on here. It's a little bit of an exaggeration because it's now this huge instrument. But I want to be able to take this whole thing right off really quickly. So let's say I was filming or taking photographs of an event, a birthday party, and I know I've kind of already set up, okay, here's where the cake is going to be, and I've got my camera, and I've kind of set it all up, and then the children gather around and blow out the candles, and then something kind of fun happens. Somebody drops something in the kitchen or something, right? I want to be able to quickly take this off and leave the room and take a photograph. Because, and this might sound obvious, but there are a lot of tripods that the only way to get the camera on and off the tripod is by actually physically screwing the camera onto the tripod, right? So that means that if something was happening and you're like, oh my goodness, and you end up just carrying your tripod around, right, and setting it up, and that is just like the least ideal situation possible. So I'm just going to take this off. So again, this is just this quick release plate where your camera can kind of fit inside. Let's see if I can see that. All right, so it generally looks like this, and that way I can just take my camera, set it inside, and boom, it's now attached on there. And of course you want to just make sure that it did clip in fully before you lift it. I'm always, whenever I put my camera in a tripod, I really want to make sure it's in there nice and good. Now you can see this is I think I got this for like $30, this tripod. So this whole thing, you know, it's kind of plasticky. So it has a little bit of warble or wobble to it, right? It's not super secure. So just thinking about like, this is going to be good for most photography. It's cheap. It's also quite light, right? Not that durable. In fact, I did a project a few years ago where I went up to the North Pole, like the literal North Pole, not Alaska or the Yukon, places I've actually been, but to the North Pole, like the Alaska's like halfway there. And I took a tripod similar to this up there and was doing some work, I was making paintings actually in the -40-degree weather in the middle of winter. And these little clips on the tripod froze and broke off, right? They're just these flimsy little things. So I ended up, by the time I was on my way home, everything was just covered in duct tape. So just something to kind of think about if you're doing a lot of really cold weather, or you're spending a lot of time on a beach. A kind of a cheap tripod is going to get sand and dust, and it may or may not last for an extended period of time in those kind of harsh conditions. So just on the other hand, you know, I actually kind of prefer cheap tripods, because if they break or you lose it, and gear, if you're doing any kind of larger production, like a wedding or anything, it's not unusual for you to lose equipment, right? Especially if you have people helping you and somebody thinks they put something in a van or whatever, and you get home and you can't find it, which is a good idea to have an inventory list so you can kind of check off, okay, we got the 2 tripods, so we have all the light stands, check, 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 and so you have all your gear. But that was in a situation where I forgot to, I've learned my lesson, now I do that kind of thing. Anyway, so this here that we're looking at is I think about $110 tripod. And so this I got from a place called Henry's Camera here in Vancouver. And this, I think it was made for, it's the Cameron brand, and it just feels more solid. It's heavier, but it just, everything feels like it's made of some kind of metal or something. And so that just gives you the feeling like, you know, if I put my camera on here, that it's more secure. The other reason why, and so what I was playing with here while I'm babbling around is, again, this removable head. and that clips into place, and it really feels nice and secure. The other reason why I bought this tripod in particular is it just really nice, fluid kind of movement. So if I wanted to do a pan or tilt with the camera, like I could tilt the camera up nice, like I'm barely touching this with my finger. And so the result, if I was filming something, would be a nice movement of the camera. If I was to do that with the previous tripod, everything would be kind of like, right? And it just would be an unpleasant kind of thing, right? So again, I could do the same thing, panning, and I could even kind of slowly tilt. In fact, let's, well, I was just going to say I was going to put this on here, but this doesn't have the plate that I can mount it to. So I won't. But I was just going to show you how I could do a nice little fluid pan. So this, again, also has these kind of clips. The thing with these, though, is they just feel a little bit, they're still plastic, but they do feel like they're a little bit more solidly built. So overall, this is just, you sort of pay for what you get when it comes to anything in general. But with a tripod, like a cheap tripod is going to be lighter, but generally less well made. Just I'll show you a little quick, oh, you know what, I wasn't even showing the overhead angle this whole time. I bet you people online are saying to me, what were you thinking, buddy? Okay. Well, okay. So I'm just going to show you if I have a tripod, one of the things that I often do is I'll just flip the legs out like this. I kind of go all the way around really quickly and then shake it down and all the legs come out. And this is my fast and dirty way of getting a tripod, you know, all the legs extended as quickly as possible, rather than doing one leg at a time. All right, so I got my tripod set up. If I want to move the tripod up and down, the head up and down, you're taking the handle here and then you screw it into place, and now it's kind of stuck into place, right? If I want to flip the head up and down, so this is if my camera was on here like this, I can turn this little dial on the back. I'll just kind of turn this like that. If I turn this, it allows the camera to turn onto its side, right? So that I could take portrait photographs like this. And also, if I was to tilt it on here, I would want one leg pointing this way just to support. So it makes it very difficult for the camera to want to tip over, because it is now slightly off center, the weight, right? So you just want to make sure that the weight is distributed properly. And then this one, I kind of loosen. This allows me to turn it right and left. Okay, the same sort of thing. When I'm all done, I just go around. This one, another great thing with this tripod is it is a little bit taller than the previous one. There's all these little tiny features. I'm gonna move on, I swear to God, right here. Okay. Another little quick thing is this little thing allows me to put my backpack on the bottom and to weight it down, because that is, you know, if these tripods can look kind of good, nice here in a studio, but outside where it could be a little bit windy, you know, the tripod might start moving a little bit. And when we talk about like taking photographs of stars next class, you want your tripod to be super still, because you might be taking a photograph that has a 15-second long exposure, 30 seconds, 30 minutes, right, maybe. And so you want this to be as still as possible. So this little extra weight, you could hang like a sandbag or something off of there. And then there's also, you can extend the head of your tripod up a little bit higher. The previous one has a little crank where you can crank it up. Okay, so let's, I'm going to actually bring, let's use the Gorilla Pod up here because it's a little bit taller. So, get my Gorilla Pod set up here, and now we're going to take some photographs at different shutter speeds. Okay. So quickly mount my camera onto the tripod. If you've got an old Gorilla Pod like that, what I do is kind of bend these legs in a little bit. That's kind of my little hack that I found is kind of helpful. And then just straighten it. I just turn the ball head. Oop. See, look at this. I gotta get a new one because this one is not happy anymore. And once it's kind of these little connectors start to kind of loosen a little bit, then you're kind of so if I want to take, I've got a bunch of lights on here, and I might turn some lights off just to kind of show you how this works. So I'm going to practice taking some long exposure photographs. So that means a photograph where the shutter speed is open for a longer period of time. So let me see, where were we here? I'll go back to this look. Okay, I'm actually going to turn this on to auto focus rather than the manual focus because it might be a little distracting with those blue lines. Again, if you see that black and white flashing on the screen, that is telling me that the camera says that that area is totally overexposed. It's pure white. There's no detail in that area whatsoever. If I want, I can disable that too. Some people find that really distracting. I think it's a good idea to have because it just reminds me of sometimes if you're just not paying attention and you don't want, let's say, a whole side of somebody's face to be totally overexposed. So if this is flashing on somebody's face, I'm thinking, okay, I need to kind of darken the picture a little bit, let less light into the camera so that I can see the details on their face. Okay, so right now I'm at a 1/50th of a second long shutter speed. Now I'm going to be able to, let's slow this down. So as you can see, as I'm doing this, look at the screen is going nuts. It's like everything's flashing black. It's saying, whoa, too much light. It's too bright in here. All right, so let's say I'm going to go up to 3 seconds. So this is, somebody's probably having an aneurysm right now. So it's too bright, so I need to figure a way to let less light into the camera. So you see what I'm doing is adjusting the aperture. So just like that, I turned the aperture from its widest, so 1.2, to its most narrow, f/22. So now it's a very tiny little opening, right? The depth of field is now huge. So now if I wanted to focus on something, I'd be able to get, the whole room in focus, front to back. And very little bit is overexposed. The only thing that's overexposed are the lights that I have in the room that are reflecting in some mirrors around the room. But for all intents and purposes, it's pretty good. So the other little thing I noticed though is look at my ISO. It's at 3200, which is really high. And in fact, unnecessarily high when we're doing like long exposures. So instead, I'm going to crank this down to, let's go really low. So I think I'm going to go to 200 because I know some people's cameras can't go any lower than that. So we'll go to ISO 200. And now everything is a little bit too dark. You see how my exposure meter is saying, whoa, right? So I'm going to brighten it up a bit. You can probably already see there's a slight difference in quality here, where it was less noisy than it was just a few minutes ago. So right now, if I tried to take this picture, and I'm just going to see if I have, okay, so I've got a 2-second long delay. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to run in front of, I'm going to run around the table onto the other side here, and I'm going to take a picture, and then we're going to see what the results are here. So it's, I think it's counting down, is it? Okay. So let's just see what that picture was. Okay, so you see this kind of weird ghostly effect that resulted here. So because I wasn't actually in front of the camera for that full 3-second long exposure, I kind of hesitated. I thought like, oh, is it actually taking a picture or not? So the camera was taking a picture, and it took a little bit of picture of the things in the background, and then I came into view, right? And so this is a really fun activity to play with like little kids. In fact, I usually show this just as an image, but why don't we, since I have all this set up, let's actually do this experiment. So I'm gonna go even faster here. Or sorry, even slower. Let's do like a, let's see if I can do, what is the longest exposure I can do here? I'm gonna go to f22. So right now, when I look at my settings, I have a 10-second long exposure. And you know it's 10 seconds and not 1/10 of a second, because for seconds in the shutter speed is usually like a number and then a quotation mark. Like, so that means a second, 10 seconds long. So the shutter is going to be open, exposing light onto the sensor for 10 full seconds, right? My aperture is at f22, and so that means there's a tiny little opening, but that's going to allow, it's good because light is just slowly trickling into the camera here. And then my ISO is at 200. So this is going to be a nice sharp photograph. And then I am going to, so now I'm looking at my setting. Instead of just a 2-second long countdown, I'm going to do a 10-second long countdown. So this gives me plenty of time to press the shutter and then to run in front of the camera. Okay, so let's see how well this works here. So I'm going to press the shutter right now. I pressed it, and you see it counting down, 8, 7, okay. Now you're going to see me in the picture here. Okay, so I'm here, and now I'm just going to move a little bit. And then I'm going to move even further away. Okay, so I think the camera's thinking a little bit. Let's see what this picture looks like. Okay, oh my image is a little bit obscured here. I'm just gonna try doing that one more time. So as you can see, when you're playing around with your camera like this, it's gonna be a certain amount of trial and error. So I'm going to do this again, and then I'm going to run in front. Okay. Well, you know what? I was kind of moving around in a bunch of different places, and well, I think part of the reason why it's less effective is because I've got a bunch of other lights kind of distracting the view here. So, how about what I'm going to do next, just for our experimental purposes, is I'm going to turn all the lights off in the room here and get it nice and dark. And then we're going to see what happens then. Okay, so we're going to darken the screen on the computer. And I'm going to turn another light off. Okay, so you can see how dark this room is. There's still a couple of little lights on, but it's pretty much dark as it needs to be right now. So I could make the ISO more sensitive. I could also make the aperture go down to, well, I mean, I'll just kind of show you. So I could use my ISO to brighten this scene up. But wow, it's not, you know, it's, well, I mean, let's just take, I'm going to, so let's, what I want to show you actually, just while I'm doing this, is that we can, there's a number of different ways to problem solve right now. So I'm going to take this picture and we'll see what this looks like. So this is a 10-second long exposure at ISO 4000 f/22. So we should get a relatively good picture. It's just going to have a lot of noise in it. Okay, so let's look at that picture again. So in fact, it's actually a little bit bright, right? But my ISO is just sort of unnecessarily high that, you know, it's just a little bit grainy, right? You look at the grain all around in here. And, you know, it's not particularly sharp, right? You can see the text in there is just, so instead of having our ISO so high, I'm going to keep it down. Let's just go down low. And then I'm going to open my aperture. Again, so let's just take this picture now. So 10 seconds long. So light is coming into the camera. It's creating an exposure on the sensor. And then we get to see the results here as it finishes processing. And, you know, this is a pretty good camera, and yet it's taking, you know, that extra few seconds to process the image. If you have a less expensive camera, then it could take even longer. So this looks like a pretty good photograph, especially for all of the lights being off. Really, there's only a couple of lights. There's some light on the far end of the room where you see the pretty much right below my hand here. That's the window outside. But, you know, if I was to be walking around in here, I'd probably bump into something, right? So that's what's amazing. 10-second long exposure, and yet everything is turned out pretty good here. So let's just see. And this is, I don't want to show you anything else with shutter speed. Well, the other little thing I can do is, you notice if I can keep on going all the way. Oh, it won't let me go to bulb in this mode. Interesting. Usually, it'll allow me to go into a setting called bulb. And bulb is allows me to take a photograph for as long as I want. Usually it's either by holding down the shutter release until I take my finger off, or until I press it again, and then it'll stop taking a picture. So things are really dark in here. So let's just brighten it back up. So what I want you to do, I'll have some instructions here for what I want you to do between the next class. But one of the things I really want you to try doing, and let's just get that because it's kind of distracting, is to try taking a photograph. Yikes. See, look at this. This leg just fell off. And it has fallen off in the past. So this is not just, you know, a great incident captured on film. But that's why this would probably be something I'd want to upgrade. Get another one of these here. So I'm going to take this camera right off. So what I want you to do is try reproducing what the thing I just showed you, is to take your camera, ideally if you have a tripod. If you don't have a tripod, what you can do is, what I often will do, is just put, say, a lens cap or an extra battery or your wallet. So, you know, I'll kind of lean it. Let me see if I'll just go to this view here. So if I was taking a photograph, actually maybe I'll just, that camera with all that equipment there is a little distracting. You know, you can kind of put something underneath. Oh, I have to go back here just for you to see. Just so the camera doesn't tip forward, because usually the lens on your camera might be even heavier than the body, so you might notice it wants to fall forward. And that way you can take some longer exposures if you don't have a tripod. I can't tell you how many times I've done similar things where, you know, to point the camera up, you know, you put little extra things underneath it, or you do the opposite way from behind, or so you can kind of jerry-rig something to make it work if you don't have a tripod. But you can see how helpful it can be just to kind of fine-tune your frame. So what I want you to try to do is take a photograph in a dark room. So and you might want to try doing this in little stages rather than just turning all the lights off, because sometimes if you're a little bit less familiar with your camera, finding where all of the different dials and switches are to adjust your camera can be tricky. So what I would do is, if you're just experimenting doing this, is to try taking a photograph using exposure meter in manual with all the lights on, and then let's say close the blinds or the curtains, right? And then so the light is going to drop down a little bit. So you have to make a little change to let more light in, right? Maybe slow the shutter speed down, since that's what we're talking about. And then try turning one lamp off, right? And then progressively getting it darker and darker until all the lights are off and you have a 5-second long, 10-second long exposure. And I think it's amazing to be able to do that, and then all of a sudden, with all the lights off in your room, your bathroom, or you know, a kitchen, living room, and let's say you're taking a picture of a vase of flowers or some apples or whatever it is that when you see the results of that, it looks like all the lights are on. Well, it doesn't quite. That's what's actually really interesting, is it will look similar but different. It has a really kind of odd look, a long exposure when it comes to light like that. Okay, so I want you to try taking a photograph in a dark light condition. And then also the next thing I just want to kind of quickly show, and this let's just, am I asking for it to try to use this tripod? Well, it's had problems for years, so I just hope it doesn't fall off onto the floor here. So let's just take this off. Should have learned my lesson pretty quickly. You know, I should also mention a few other things that I have here for other types of mounts. When it comes to tripods, is you don't have to just use a tripod in the traditional sense. This is a tripod I've got so that I can attach this to, our stroller, our little daughter's stroller. So I put a camera on the stroller, and then when her and I go to the park, I can just turn the stroller to the right kind of position, put my camera on top of there and take a picture. Rather than having to carry a tripod and set the tripod up, I've already got this device that I can use to hold my camera. So that's one of them. This is another thing I've gotten that will allow me to attach a camera to a ceiling, to a wall, right? So that I could then have this kind of thing like in the kitchen. Right now, I know this is probably not something most people would or even thinking that they need, but I just, while I was kind of fumbling around here, thought, you know, I've got this stuff. Why don't I mention it to people? Okay. So the other thing, on the very opposite end of the spectrum, when it comes to playing with your shutter speed, is taking fast exposures. Okay, so this involves, let's bring back, I'm just gonna, well, so I'm gonna now speed up my camera here. So now I'm going from 1 second down to half a second, 1/4, 1/5, 1/8, 1/15, 1/25, 1/40, 1/50, 1/100th of a second, 1/200th of a second. So let's just say I'm at 1/200th of a second, right? So that's a fast, relatively fast shutter speed. Now again, look how dark everything is. There were lights on there that I've disabled, so maybe I'll turn those up in a second. Now, if I go up higher, f-stops certainly gets even darker, right? So I'm gonna need to open this up, but still too dark. So let's play with our ISO. So I could go crank this up really high. Now it's kind of it's extremely high. That's maybe a better situation here. And then let's focus on that thing in the back. Now I realize the limit, probably the reason why I don't use this new tripod, this little ball head, I can't tighten here the way it is. Okay, so I'm gonna set a timer here for, let's say, 10 seconds. And that's gonna allow me to, actually, I'm gonna set it to 2 seconds here. So it's going to count down for 2 seconds, and then I'm going to try, I'm going to run past the camera on the other side of the frame here. All this camera equipment and junk all over the place. Still in the midst of cleaning up this space here. So what I'm also going to do here is I'm actually going to switch my camera from auto to manual focus. So just what I did is I'm in right now auto focus. Let's say I'm going to point it at this device here. This is the device that's doing the streaming right now. So it's going to help focus it, and then I switch my camera to manual. So now wherever I am here, it's locked at that focus distance. Okay, so I'm going to press the button, the shutter release, to take a picture, and then I'm going to run by the camera here. So let's just see how well that turned out. Okay, so you see me trying to run by the I'm just kind of entering the picture. Now let's just try this actually at a slower shutter speed, just so we can see what would happen if I was at, say, 1/50th of a second. It's much brighter, so I'm going to dial down the light, okay, and press the button. And let's see what that one was. So you can see I'm a little bit blurry. Let me see, I'm going to try that one more time here. This is all made possible by the fact that I was doing all this. Okay, so look at this. So here you can see I'm blurry. So that's at 1/50th of a second. So the last few photos, I'm just going to delete this one. Just to, okay. Oh. Okay, this setup's a little complicated. I can't really see what I'm seeing. Okay, I wonder if anybody's having problems here. I'm seeing all this kind of some warnings here popping up on my computer, but so you could see that there was a little bit of blur that was happening. My movement wasn't as clean as it was before. So let's speed things up even faster, 1/1000th of a second. And then since it's very, look at, barely anything's changing when I lower my ISO. So what this is telling me is this is really really dark situation, because barely any light has an opportunity to get to the sensor with such a fast shutter speed. This is kind of a hard thing for me to, well, we'll do a countdown. We'll see how well this works. Oh, I think I was too fast. Let's try this one more time. Okay. I was trying to run really fast through the frame. Well, this is a hard thing for me to do on my own, but if you have if you're at home and you have children, taking pictures of them while they're running around, try taking long exposures so they can blur. Try taking exposures while they're running with a fast exposure. Try having them jump up and down, and you'll see the different effects that result from that. Okay, just really quickly to move on, and then we're gonna, I think Yannick sent in a few photos I want to take a look at. I do want to show you a few kind of a list of situations for when you would want to why you would want to use different film speeds at different times here. So this grid on this chart on the screen here, table on the screen, I mean, is shows different kinds of speeds for different kinds of situations. So one of the fastest speeds you probably have in your camera is 1/4000th of a second. Now, that is usually probably faster than most people would even need it. So, you know, you would do, if you took a photograph of cars driving down the freeway at this speed, they are going to look like they're parked on the freeway. They're not going to look like they're zipping by. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? If you wanted let's say you were hired by somebody to take photographs of, let's say, Indy or NASCAR or some kind of car race, right? And you took photographs at that speed and then you showed it to the editor, they would say, okay, these are nice photographs, but didn't you take any photos of the cars moving during the race? Or are these just, you know, before and after where, you know, fans can walk around and get their photos taken next to the car and say, no, this is during the race. It was really fast. And say, oh, well, it doesn't really look like it's fast. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind, is just because your camera can go that fast doesn't mean you want it to take photographs that fast. So you may actually want to go a little bit slower of a shutter speed so you can get the effect of the wheels turning and of the car moving kind of quickly. And so the same sort of thing if you want to take a picture of like a hummingbird buzzing around. We had one buzzing around the other day, and they're super exciting. And when you see them, right, their wings are just a blur, right? So you could take a really fast shutter speed and you could freeze the action so their wings are a nice sharp kind of motion. But if you do that, people might not even know it's a hummingbird. They're like, oh, what bird is... So again, if you slow it down, then those wings are going to be blurry, and then is more likely to reflect what people actually see. So again, you'll need a lot of light if you want to do these situations. So you need to have extra lights, you know, blaring light in. If you've ever seen like the Olympics, you know, where Usain Bolt is crossing the 100-meter, they have all of these lights right at the finish line, blasting light there, so that they can get really fast shutter speeds to make sure, you know, they want to make, if there was any confusion as to who was crossing that finish line first, right? Was it this person here or this person? Like, so they want to be able to capture that as well as possible using lots of light. Now you can see here in the middle, I put this 1/50 of a second. Be careful, camera shake is possible here. So that's why when your camera, sometimes you might see it says, you know, 1/30th of a second long exposure when you're hand holding the camera. And I think that's, your camera certainly believes it can do probably a better job than it can do, right? So, because anything slower than this means that the shutter is open long enough to might capture a little bit of your hands moving around here. If you want to take photographs of like waterfalls blurring, so, or let's say, here's a couple examples of a fast shutter speed where we see the water spraying up onto the beach, versus a slower shutter speed where the water kind of comes in and out and in, right? And it just creates a different kind of this silky effect. And you can imagine if this was a waterfall or a river, or, you know, you would get a different kind of look than these two very, you know, same angle but different kind of effect, right? Here's somebody standing in front of a train coming into the station, and a long shutter speed, and not even too long, but just this makes the train look like it's going super fast, and now the train is blurred, right? As long as this person stays relatively still, they'll be kind of sharp. And then again, you've probably seen images like this where water dripping into a bucket, and you have a very fast shutter speed. So if you want to take photographs of fireworks, you want to be around like 1 to 3 second long exposure, so you can not just get the initial bang, but you kind of want the firework to kind of come out, right? So having a tripod is kind of necessary for anything down here. Night photography, I'm going to show you some light trails here in a second. And if you want to do any kind of photos of stars, which I'm going to show you all next week how to do, then you want to be in that zone. So here's just a few other little... this is an exercise when I'm teaching in a classroom and we have a sink. I get people to, we turn the sink on so it's just sort of dripping, right? And if you're at, you know, 1/60th of a second, it's reasonably fast enough you'll be able to capture the different drips. Versus, you know, here's a 1 second long, all of a sudden 3 or 4 drips start to make it look like it's water shooting out, Light trails. So I'm going to show you a photograph here in a second that I took recently of how to do that. And I think we'll talk about some of this other stuff on Wednesday. So So this is a photograph that you could try recreating. And I also put the different exposure settings there on the screen so that you could, if you want to try to replicate this, you kind of give you an idea of where to go. So this is a photograph I took here in Vancouver. This is on, if you know Vancouver at all, this is Main Street, and looking towards downtown, and Broadway is kind of just a block behind me. And this was taken at about 9:30 at night last year, about this exact time in the middle of May. So it's about 45 minutes after sunset, right? So after the golden hour, I had that beautiful light. I went outside and took this photograph of the cars driving by. So 160 ISO, because this is basically the lowest ISO I think of this camera that I was using. So it's the least sensitive my sensor can be, right? Because the lower this ISO means the longer my shutter speed can be. And also the sharper the image is going to be. So, oh, this is not supposed to be that f/22, just ignore that. So it's f/13. So f/13 is kind of in between f/22 and f/2.5 or 3.5 or somewhere around there for your camera. And I'll also say, actually, the higher you go with your aperture, the more you get this kind of these weird. I don't know what I know there's a name for it. I just can't remember. But you see how all these street lamps have this kind of star-like effect? The higher this number gets to actually f/22, the more you get this really kind of beautiful star-like pattern out of light like that. So just something to consider, right? As this goes down, this will just become just like a regular light bulb, right? And then the shutter speed, this is a 3 seconds. So that gives the cars that are driving by time to kind of appear on the horizon and then drive by. You know, like 1 steamboat, 2 steamboat, 3. And so I took probably 30 to 40 photographs over a period of about 20 minutes to get this image. There was a few other ones I liked, but this one was the best because there was the most amount of traffic going in both directions at the same time, right? There were some photos that looked really great on this side, where lots of cars were coming in this direction, and then there were some great photographs that looked really great with light coming this way. So it takes some time, not only to figure out what your camera settings are, but to find the right moment for taking an image. So I would encourage you to try taking a photograph like this. If you can think of taking a photograph looking over a bridge, cars driving by. Here in Vancouver, if you go to the Stanley Park, there's a little bridge that overlooks the road as it's about to go over the Lionsgate Bridge, this big bridge that looks kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And so if you go and stand there kind of at around the same sort of time, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, there's going to be actually probably 5 or 6 other photographers there. And I've sent many students there who go and set up, and there are other photographers there who can even help. If you're kind of nice enough and you're saying, hey, I'm really struggling, usually there's another photographer who's happy enough to assist you, because it's super exciting to get a photograph like this, which is visually impossible for our eyes to see on their own, right? So when your camera can show you something that your eyes can't see, that is really exciting, right? So I would encourage you, if you have a little bit of time, is to try taking a photograph like this. Okay, so I'm just going to show you that I have a little graphic here showing kind of some of the things for next class. I'm just going to bring this up, and then we're going to take a look at some photos. So this will be kind of conclude all the lesson for today, and then if you're interested in sticking around for some feedback and some photographs, I'm going to look for that right now. So where are these photos? So my page. So again, playing with your shutter speed, try going from kind of the extremes, going from one side all the way to the other, and really kind of see what happens when you're taking a photograph with all the lights on and then all the lights off, and maybe kind of even little steps in between there. Another thing to think about is just as you're going about your day is looking for interesting things to take photographs of. And you could even do that 3-photo picture project we did all the way at the very, very beginning. You could try doing this again, but just at different times of the day, so you could see what the different kinds of results are. So let's say you walk by some flowers in your neighborhood at 9 in the morning. You walk by them again at 1 in the afternoon, at 5 in the afternoon, at 8, which will be around kind of sunset golden hour for us right now. And then you try doing the same thing at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. I think you'll be like really excited by the results, because you're going to get photos that you certainly would never even have bothered attempting to do on your iPhone. And you can get that kind of nice little blur that's going on. So I'm just, I've got some photos. I got a bunch of photos here, so we'll have a kind of a nice little discussion. Got photos by Yannick and then Benjamin. Not sure if I'm downloading a couple. Let me see. Okay. And another thing I want you to think about as you're going about this is look for photographs that have blur in magazines or on the web, so that you can, because once you start seeing these photographs, you're going to see them everywhere. And think about like what the settings were that people used to take those photographs. Okay. So I'm just gonna pull these into position here. These are photos that Yannick sent here. Okay. So I like this really interesting super shallow depth of field photograph of this chain covered in water, and we're so close we can even see how the water kind of forms this kind of doesn't go in between. It kind of forms, I don't know what the scientific name of it is, like surface tension, I guess. And then what's really neat is even this reflection. You see the sky upside down here. And then, so the whole image is reproduced upside down. So you can see how people started thinking about photographs by looking in reflections in mirrors and in water and puddles and all that kind of stuff, right? And then I imagine these things are raindrops kind of shooting by in the background. So relatively fast shutter speed, I would say. Probably, I wonder if we can see any of the... No, so it didn't preserve any information here. Nevertheless, it is a certainly interesting dynamic composition. Like we have the chain on the top, and then this kind of empty space down here. I kind of almost feel like that I want to see, oops, more of that. Move the keyboard over here. Part of me wants more of this raindrop kind of thing in here. Now, obviously, they're way too close to be able to see, but that might be something for you to think about. If you can try, if you have a lens, we'll call a macro lens, where you can get close up to something, that helps. If you don't, then try getting as close as possible and zooming into an image and see if you can capture something in there. But I think that, for me, is kind of the most interesting potential. I like that you really pushed the boundary here and left a lot of empty space. I think maybe less successful than this one. Somehow, because this drip is kind of right in the middle, and there's kind of all this, it's all kind of gray. I'm not really, like here, I guess I kind of want to see what is down here. There's something about this, it almost looks like it's black and white, but I see a little bit of color in there. Somehow this background just feels a little bit more pleasing. Maybe just because that chain isn't quite so high, I think. Again, super shallow depth of field, because we can see this central link is in nice sharp focus, and then things, you know, this is out of focus, this is all out of focus, this is all out of focus. So your depth of field here is, you know, it's very narrow. It's like an inch, right? So I imagine you're somewhere, you're at your lowest aperture number, and depending on the lens, it's going to be somewhere around, like, I imagine if you're using your kit lens, you're probably at f4, and you're zoomed in maybe. And so it just kind of creates this really nice effect where we have a lot of breathing room around us here. Yeah, so I would think this would be kind of nice enough to even think about printing and framing. And then what are we looking at here? Is that a bug or something underneath there? But I guess it's kind of interesting because this here might just be another kind of plant, but something about the striations on this leaf kind of make it look like little legs or something. I do love the contrast. I always say contrast a lot because it's really important in photos in so many different ways. The contrast of color in this situation, of this kind of fire engine red, orange, works really. There's nothing else like it elsewhere in the photograph. So it captures our attention right off the bat. There's no wondering about what the focus of this picture is. I also don't, I kind of like that this little bit in the background is not totally out of focus. Because we could see the grass, and we even see the dew on here is creating these little bokeh balls, right? In the out of focus areas. So all this dew on here is just really, it has like this really fresh, you know, right after the rain kind of quality. I do think, I mean, I don't know anything about gardening or flowers, so I don't know, maybe this kind of flower closes up a little bit when it gets wet and then opens up again or something. But I do kind of feel like I want to see more of the inside of this flower. Maybe, again, if you know a lot about plants and you look at it and you're like, well, that's because this particular plant does this and that, and I was trying to capture that moment, then that's totally fair. I would say this, for me, is your strongest image. So strong that I would say, like, this looks like a fantastic kind of photo for like a book cover, or like you can imagine. So we go to tools and just like rotate the left. Well, it wouldn't make sense for this drip to be going off that way, but you know, if I was to make like a book cover or something, which I've done many times, you know, so let's say you have this, and then you have maybe the title in the middle, you know, or the author's name down here. Maybe I'd put a little bit more room on the top and have, you know, the chain effect, or I don't know what it would be, right? But I can just see this being a really nice kind of cover. So the other thing to think about is there are opportunities. It's not so lucrative anymore, but people taking photographs for stock image photography websites. So people, you used to be able to get paid a lot more for it than you do now, but there's still quite a demand for it. So if you take tons of just random photos like this, you can sell them to like Getty Images, iStock Photo, and they would buy photographs like this because somebody would want to buy something like that because it's generic enough. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's generic enough that we don't know necessarily where it is, but somebody could buy this photograph or license it for, you know, and you'll get, depending on how many people it's licensed to, you could get, like, I don't know, somewhere between $1 to $50 or $100, depending on the situation. So just a little thing to think about if you want to look into that, taking images for stock photography websites. Okay, so these are photos that Benjamin sent in. So I'm just going to take a look at these. And I have a little sip of tea here before I lose my voice. Great photos, Yannick. I really appreciate it. And also all of your support. You've been very generous too. With and just to remind other people, like Yannick has done, is if you're finding this of any value, you can send a small donation using the PayPal link below. $1, $50, $1,000 or more. Just helps support the channel and keep the lights on down here. So like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that other stuff. Okay, so looking at these flowers that Ben sent in, that is beautiful. So I would say this looks like, this is another example of, often people are taking photographs with the most shallow depth of field possible. So they go and they spend, like here, this 56mm lens that can go to f1.2, and this is like I bought this used for like $800. Don't tell my wife. But it takes beautiful out of, like, the backgrounds, very shallow depth of field. So I use it for portrait photography. And it's paid for itself many times over, but like for doing headshots for actors and all that kind of stuff. But often I think people's instinct is to use f1.2 all of the time. And I like that we can see detail in these leaves. So this is not, I don't know if, again, none of the info comes through here. But, you know, I would, if I was to guess, I'd say you're, again, like f4 or 5 maybe. And so we can see that these are leaves. They're not in sharp focus because you're literally focusing our attention purely on these flowers right in the middle. And I mean, we can't zoom in too much because it's going to start pixelating because of the email that how it arrived, you and I are able to look at these photographs. But I think it looks fantastic. This is a great photograph. I could see you taking this and putting it on a coffee mug, or printing it and putting it in a calendar or a card to send to a family member, right? I mean, and again, I'm just fishing for things to give you feedback on. The only thing I would say is it's a little bit compressed to the bottom. There's a little tension here where, so if you have another one or opportunity, is just to kind of maybe giving a little bit more breathing room to the bottom. But having said that, it's not a problem. Because the thing is that I often see photographs like this, right? So often people will send me images like this, and I'm like, oh, it's just like taking a photograph of somebody's body and it's just the tip of their toes is cut off, or somebody's, like, I often taking pictures of my daughter and she's flapping her arms and sometimes her hands, just the tips go out of the picture, and it just sort of makes the photograph just slightly unusable, because it's just we're missing some of that breathing room that is nice to have. I feel like if you're going to cut a part of somebody's body off, then cut right at the hips, right? Or, you know, just like in the image you're seeing here, like of me, right? You know, it's same sort of thing. If like the tip of my head was just being cut off like this, it would drive people insane, right? In fact, I think this is already, you know, pretty high or pretty low here. I have to adjust the camera for next time. Okay, wow, this is again a really nice photograph. So what's nice is that instead of just having these leaves in the picture and then more leaves in the background, we see this trail that is slightly out of focus. So this is great. This is because this helps tell us a little bit more of a story. So we have these, these leaves, but then we have another kind of, you know, subplot. Now we know kind of where we are. Because let's say you could take this very similar photograph, but there's a school bus driving by in a busy street, right? And that would make us think, oh, this poor plant trying to, you know, maybe it's in the median, in between, in the median of a, you know, 8-lane highway, right? And we're like, oh, this poor plant trying to thrive in the most difficult of circumstances. And yet now here we have a very different, like, look at this plant. It's like it's in plant heaven in this nice, lush kind of forest, right? So all of that works really well. I don't have anything to say. I think this is great. This is a really nice kind of way of using the background. Again, beautiful. I like the dew on here. I even don't mind this blade of grass that's kind of cutting in front of the flower. I'm just gonna take my because it helps kind of show depth here. I mean, I could see some people saying maybe not having that there, but there's some one thing I like doing is I like taking pictures of people where something, in fact, what I often will do if I'm taking a photograph of, I don't have anything necessarily I can hold in front of me right now, but let's say, let's just kind of imagine that this is like a leaf or something. It's not, I don't think you can quite see that. But let's say I'm taking a portrait. No, it's still not showing up, but what I'll often do is have like take photographs of somebody in a forest and have just a few little leaves or something hanging, kind of like, so I'll be with my camera kind of looking, and somehow I'll just get a little bit of that in front of the view. And I'll often even just pick up a couple of blades of grass and just hold them in front of the camera a little bit, right? Or a branch, just to kind of give an effect similar to this. It helps provide a little bit more context, right? And you can even use, if you have like a branch, it's kind of like a Y shape, and you're kind of holding it in the center, it'll act like that frame that you can use that we talked about in the first or second class. A great moon. Wow, and it makes the sky look like ink black, right? So we don't see any stars or anything in here. I won't really be able to zoom too much. I mean, this is, it makes the moon look really, really, really bright. I feel like maybe if we were even on a slower shutter speed, we might be able to see more of the stars around here, which could be nice. But, you know, if you're trying to take a picture of the moon, you can't do much better than this, right? So what would I mean, things to think about that could add a little bit more to it is a little bit of context. Like, you know, if there was a little bit of a tent or a fire happening in the foreground here, or this is over a lake and we see its reflection over the water, or it's being taken through the windshield of a car and we see a map that says Algonquin Park or Yellowstone National Park, you know, reflecting onto the windshield, or somebody's feet here, or a child sleeping in the back seat. You know, all those little tiny things just will add a little bit more complexity, because as beautiful of a moon image as it is was this taken, you know, in South Africa or Tokyo, Japan, or, you know, like, so where were you when you took this photograph? Like, it might be nice to see some of your environment or context there. And then you got your kitchen here. So this, I think, is, you know, one thing I always encourage people to do is taking photographs in your kitchen, because everybody's got all sorts of, you know, things around there that they can organize and show and use for taking pictures and experimenting. You know, it doesn't really seem like there's any. It's not like it doesn't seem like you organize this as a still life and kind of put things in a particular place to make it a great composition or anything. It looks maybe more like you're testing with your camera. Everything is kind of a nice sharp focus. Like this kind of plastic thing, you know, wrapping or whatever. I don't know, maybe I'm just like a neat freak. I'm like, I just want to go over there and put this plastic in the recycling or something. And this lid, I want to close it so this muffin doesn't go bad. But that's more about me. I mean, but I do think those kind of little things are fun, like tensions to put in a photograph. Like, if everything is too perfect, then it becomes almost like robotic and less interesting. Like, one of the things that painters, like Dutch painters, were very famous for doing still life paintings in the 15th, 16th centuries, and or 16th, 17th centuries. And one of the things they would do is they would paint these beautiful flowers and banquet dinners, like without people eating them, but just the food. But what they would always do is put like little ants crawling or eating bites out of things. So at first it looks really beautiful, and then you start looking at it and you see like the decay happening. And so that was kind of maybe a little inside joke that the artist would make. But I do think that's the principle there of rewarding people for looking closely at your photographs. And those extra little details kind of, again, that little tension can draw people into the photo as much, and while at the same time it might turn some other people off. And then this kind of rotting tree. Looks like maybe it's the inside of a tree that's rotting. And all of the, so, you know, when I don't know what the story is here, but it looks like there's this nice healthy tree here, and then either the inside of the same tree that is rotting and falling apart, or another tree right next to it. So you kind of have this like cycle of life thing happening here, of like the new versus the old, or, you know, the healthy versus the dying, or, you know, this whole entropy thing here. I mean, it is a really odd kind of, I mean, this tree trunk starts to look like an elephant leg or foot, right? So I am maybe more attracted to this than here. It is certainly an odd composition. Like, I think to myself, like, what would it look like if we were this is why it's also, when you're taking photographs, it can be handy to just turn the camera onto its side. You know, so taking photographs, like you frame it, oh, that looks nice, and then taking it and going onto its side and seeing if you just frame the composition differently. You know, when I do that, you probably are not happy with this because it does remove all that other details. But I don't know if there was, for me personally, as much interest in that other. I'll just kind of go back into this area and this little overexposed stick, because I think this is the more interesting part, and it is, in fairness, like on the one, you know, off to the side, so it is a little bit more dynamic. I just don't know if this has the weight to counterbalance this form. I don't know. That's just my reaction to these photographs, all of which are really, really good. If of all of them, what would I say? Again, I would say that's beautiful. I mean, I think they're all really beautiful, but I would say these two are probably my favorite of all of them. Okay, so I think I've been talking here for almost 2 hours. I think it's time for me to take a little bit of a dinner break here. So for next class, what I'd like for you to do is really play with the shutter speed on your camera. Try turning the lights up and down. Looking for interesting places that you could take photographs at different times of the day. And if you're out at night with a friend, you know, you go, well, in the future, you go see a movie and on the way out, you see like the marquee looks really cool. Put that in the back of your mind, then come back the next night and take a photograph of it like that. Or like we just saw some photographs of the moon. I don't know what the moon phases are right now, but you don't always need to take a big picture of the full moon, like a crescent moon, or even the moon when it's all black, which is, what is that? Harvest moon? I don't know. Make for great photographs. And then lastly is just to maybe consider buying a tripod. You don't have to buy, actually I forgot to show you my wife's $100 or it's like $300 or $400 Manfrotto, and that one is a beautiful, kind of more expensive tripod, but very heavy. So you don't have to spend $500 on a tripod. You could spend $40 to get yourself a great one. You can get one from a used on eBay or, you know, on a garage sale. I would pick it up. Make sure though it has the removable head. Okay, so having said that, I think I'm going to call it a class. If you don't mind liking, subscribe, hitting that little bell to get notified of upcoming videos. If you want to send a donation, the link is down below. Otherwise, we're going to see you on Wednesday. Send me your photographs. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.